All right, then that's 4:30, so that means it's go time.
Yeah!
Let's go. All right. Okay, guys, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you all being here. I wanted to give a presentation at a panel at a Comic-Con for years. This is a huge thing for me. This is life goal. To put it another little bit more memeful way, do you know how long I waited with this? Woo, I want to make a name for myself here. All right, so this is Canon events, the purpose of them, and you. This is a presentation. We're going to go over how character consistency can really be helped by thinking about the events that really define a setting and a character, or the canon events. Now, the people I think will benefit a lot from this are these kinds of people. First of all, any kind of storyteller. These are people all the way from, I'm writing the next big Hollywood blockbuster, all the way down to, I have a character for Dungeons and Dragons, right? These principles are going to help you be able to bring life to that character, as well as bring a certain amount of gravitas to them that's really going to enhance the story that you're telling. Next, anyone who's working on their media literacy skills. If you hop online and you look on YouTube or anywhere else, you're going to find a gajillion articles all about how media literacy is dead. People only seem to understand the base message of whatever movie or TV show or comic or whatever you're participating in. But keeping this in mind will be something that will help you be able to practice thinking about the stories that you participate in on a little bit of a deeper level. And then, of course, anyone who loves Spider-Man, because we're going to be talking about Spider-Man a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, we freaking love Spider-Man. Let's go ahead and give you the timeline of how things are going to be going on here. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what canon events are and why you need them. A lot of people I've heard talk about how we don't actually need like any set events for our characters to define them. We're going to talk a little bit about why you probably do. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about how emotion, reaction, and setting change things. And then I'm going to give you 3 practical tips and things to look for.
Well, that's the same.
It was a 50-50 chance. I wasn't sure. I tried to give myself a little disclaimer. I don't know, guys.
It's a canon event.
This is a canon event. This is the beginning of my villain origin story, folks. But who the heck is this guy? Let me tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Taylor Campbell. Several years ago, I was attending BYU, Idaho, and when I was there, I taught and facilitated a workshop all about comic book creation, diving into the unique way you can tell stories using comics. After that, I transferred, and then I graduated with a degree in filmmaking. I specifically was studying screenwriting as well as directing. And now my current bread and butter is a YouTube channel called Comic Crash. It's been a wonderful experience. It's been this important part of my life here. I've been working on it for a few years now, and that's where you can find the most of me. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about first, what is a canon event, and what are they trying to say, the filmmakers of the movie Across the Spider-Verse, what are they saying about canon events? Now, a canon event is very simply defined as the kind of life events that have to happen in regards to your character as far as the story is concerned. If you're Peter Parker and you're Spider-Man, guess what? Your Uncle Ben, he doesn't get to stay around for very long. Your first girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, she's not going to be that good at bridge jumping. That's just, these are just the things that you're going to have to deal with. Anyway, canon events are things that are supposed to happen in your character's story, and these are the elements of them. Anyway, now when Phil Lord and Chris Miller were coming up with the concept of a canon event, they basically were trying to use it as a critique of storytelling and as a critique of people who have to say you have to do these things when you're telling a story. If you're using this character, this has to happen this way. And of course, the message of the movie ultimately turned out to be that you don't. We saw the movie mostly from Miles Morales' perspective, and he's in this weird position where he's told that his destiny is supposed to go in one direction, and if it doesn't go in that direction, then everything else falls apart, and he's choosing to reject that. So in the movie, we have that idea very cemented there, but as far as the creative process, I'm finding more and more that following rules and following canon events can lead to more interesting creativity and more interesting choices for your characters. And none demonstrate this better than these two Spider-Mans. These two Spider-Mans are exactly the same. One is Peter Parker, one goes by the name Ben Reilly. They both grew up with the same upbringing. They both had the same Uncle Ben. They both had the same Aunt May. They both had the same origin story. The only difference between these two, and this is why I love these as an example, the only difference is that Ben Reilly, the one on the left, knows that he's a clone. That's like the only difference. But that right there sent them on a completely different trajectory. All of a sudden, Ben Reilly's the one who has to change his appearance. Ben Reilly's the one who has to move away from New York City. Ben Reilly's the one who has to have a different costume. And all the while, he gets asked very interesting questions like, how come the guy who is the exact genetic copy of me gets to go home to the girl that I remember loving, but I don't get to? These are fascinating questions, but that one event leads Ben Reilly onto a completely different path. Now let's talk a little bit about Ultimate Spider-Man Ben Reilly. Famously, Brian Michael Bendis, who wrote Ultimate Spider-Man, he wasn't super jazzed about adapting the Clone Saga. Or that's what we can gather anyway. And oftentimes he would take elements of that Clone Saga and he would put them in places where they didn't quite belong so that it made it harder to justify doing the Clone Saga, which ultimately he ended up having to. But one of these was Ben Reilly. He made Ben Reilly a completely different character, completely unassociated with Peter Parker, completely unassociated with Spider-Man. He's a scientist. He works with Kirk Connors. And that right there, this isn't really Ben Reilly, is it? This doesn't really fit that character. We can't really look at this guy and say, yeah, this is the same person that we've been seeing this whole time in the Amazing books. A little bit more of a nuanced example. Captain America, the Sentinel of Liberty. We have main universe Captain America over here on the right, and then Ultimate Captain America a little bit on the left. Now, I was always surprised by how Captain America seemed a little bit more like a jerk in Ultimates. Like, he would say things that are like so out there and kind of awful and kind of mean and maybe a little bit racist sometimes. Like, it was bizarre. Now, when I looked into this, and Mark Millar, when he was writing Ultimate Captain America, said he wanted it to be a critique on post-9/11 patriotism. And the kind of, we're not going to ask questions, we're just going to go with what we are told. And that led these two characters to be very different. And I've met tons of people who will love this character, but when they get to that character, they're like, what in the world is happening here? That's not Captain America. So when you don't follow the certain characteristics of that character, what you're going to end up with is a lot of confused people who aren't familiar with what you're trying to say. But what about setting? Setting changes a lot when it comes to a character. Here we have various versions of Sherlock Holmes. All right, we got classic Sherlock Holmes here. He lives here in, Victorian London. He does this thing. What happens when you take him and put him in a different place or time? What has to change about Sherlock Holmes in order for him to work? Or what if you put him in a different situation? He's not a detective. Well, he's not working with the police. He's not like a consult for the police. What if he's in a hospital? How does Sherlock Holmes have to change if you put him in a hospital setting? What happens to the relationships between characters when you do that? Or what if we put him in a completely fantastical world, we make him a cartoon mouse? His arch nemesis is this giant rodent who's 3 times as big as he is with these sharp claws and fangs and there's this whole society. How does Sherlock Holmes have to change in order to fit an environment like that? And now let's talk a little bit about Ultimate Spider-Man, because I love Ultimate Spider-Man. This was the comic I grew up on. Ultimate Spider-Man, when it was conceived, Marvel was looking at what the movies were doing. They saw, okay, Blade is doing some really cool things. Ghost Rider, that was pretty successful. X-Men is creating a huge blast where you have the Spider-Man movie up on the horizon here. We got to cash in on this. So they went to the Marvel Publishing and said, okay, we need a new Spider-Man book, started from the beginning, get rid of all 40 years of continuity so that we can just start anew. Let's bring in the new readers. And so Brian Michael Bendis, whom I love his work, he said, okay, we're making Ultimate Spider-Man. We're taking Peter back to 15 years old. He's back in high school. But now we have 40 years of hindsight, and we have the brand new year of 2000 to work with.
Yeah.
This led to some very interesting changes. They were essentially telling the same story, but at the same time, they were so different because the setting by itself was different. So Amazing Spider-Man, he was bitten by a radioactive spider. Because in the 1960s, that's the big scary science. We don't know what radioactivity is. Like, this is this new scary thing, and the bad guys have it, and we have it, we're not sure what to do with it. Over on Ultimate, though, it was a genetically modified spider. Because crazy genetics is the big scary science of the year 2000. Aunt May, famously, loves Captain America in Amazing Spider-Man because she's a child of the 40s. She grew up through World War II. She grew up with that hyper-patriotism. She grew up with Captain America being the coolest person ever. And Ultimate, she grew up in the 70s. She probably helped Ben dodge the draft. She probably, she hates it. First time she met Captain America, she slapped him in the face. But that's because that's what the setting demanded. Now, Timothy J. Holland. I was very much in the camp when they were announcing Tom Holland was going to be Spider-Man that was pretty upset that Andrew Garfield didn't get to continue. He was cheated out of his 3rd movie, and then we're getting all these rumors about Spider-Man. I remember that, this scrawny kid from Ender's Game was, in the running to play Spider-Man, and I just couldn't wrap my head around that. It's so he's 10. But ultimately, we did get Tom Holland, and he's in a very different setting. And his character is very different because of it. Amazing Spider-Man, he was coming up in this first wave of brand new superheroes. In the Marvel Universe, there were no superheroes for 15, 20-ish years. So, yeah, he shows up, he has superpowers, he's going to go into entertainment. He's going to see if he can cash in on this, because he can do things nobody else can do. Tom Holland, though, he grows up in a world where superheroes are very well established. Not only are they well established, he loves them. So, of course, he gets superpowers, and he's looking at his hero, Tony Stark. He's going to just go straight to being a superhero. I've heard some interesting discourse about this, that Uncle Ben doesn't even exist in this universe. Because he doesn't need to. Peter doesn't need to have that lesson of responsibility, and if he does learn that, he learns that in Far From Home, or No Way Home, I should say, when Aunt May dies. He still has the same kind of canon event, but it's laid out differently because the setting demands that it's laid out differently. How do emotions change things, then? Those of you who know me know that I love Pixar. And I really fell in love with Inside Out. Because Inside Out takes an important part of storytelling and gives it a really interesting visual in this scene. Joy is at the bottom of the chasm. She's about to be forgotten. She finds one of the core memories. It's a core memory of Riley's team cheering her on. It's a happy memory. But then she rewinds it. And after she rewinds it, she sees that, no, Riley lost that game. Everyone in the audience was under the impression that this was a victory. It was a loss. And it was very sad. The memory turns blue. But then afterwards, it becomes happy. That's incredible to me because these canon events, these events that help define characters and define people, what's more important than the event is the emotion behind the event. How that changed it. That changes how you look at everything. And the great example of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about Batman and Superman. In Batman v Superman, we have Batman who hears about this guy who is all-powerful, can seemingly not be stopped, and his first reaction is to, let's build a weapon, let's kill the beast. I have this cool spear, I have this cool armor, I'm going to fight Superman, and it's going to be glorious, and it's going to do okay with critics. And then you have the comic book version. This is a panel from Man of Steel number 3, might be 4, I'm pretty sure it's 3, where we find one of the many, many first times that Batman and Superman meet. And in that one, Batman knows about this all-powerful being who can seemingly not be stopped. But instead of reacting out of fear, he chooses to react out of a sense of mindfulness. This is the Batman who, yeah, he trusts Superman, but he does have a pocket full of kryptonite in his belt. He does have contingency plans for the rest of the Justice League. This one leads to Tower of Babel, which is that famous story where his contingency plans get leaked to the bad guys. And then it leads on to years of Batman trying to get redemption in his friend's eyes for that kind of betrayal. So see, it's a very similar canon event, but in one, we react in fear, which then turns into needing to be redeemed, which turns into creating the Justice League. And in the other, we have one reacting with caution, which then turns into betrayal and turns into having to be redeemed in the eyes of the League. So here are some takeaways for creators and participants alike that I think will be very beneficial for everyone involved. First, you don't need a lot of canon events to start. The story is where most of the events are located anyway. Amazing Fantasy number 15 is a fantastic example of this. It's a short story. It's only like 15 pages long compared to our standard, we're used to 22, 24 pages. And in that one, at the very beginning, all we know about Peter Parker is that he's kind of a nerd, he's kind of picked on, and he lives with his aunt and uncle. That's like it. We basically just have who is the character, what do they want, and what do they actually need. And that's where the whole story happens. Any kind of canon event that defines Spider-Man happens within the story. So you don't need a lot to start. You just need to start. What is important, what is considered important canon is often not as much as you think, but they should be followed. Because that's what helps define your character. Like we talked a little bit about Tom Holland, or better example, let's go with this one. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield both had their Uncle Ben killed, and it was both killed by a guy they could have stopped. Tobey Maguire catches the bad guy. Andrew Garfield doesn't. He just gets to live with knowing that the guy is still out there somewhere. So what's really important here? Is it important that Spider-Man catches the bad guy? Or is it important that Peter learns the lesson? And character decisions are based in emotion. I meet a lot of people who will write their fun fan fictions, which everyone should do. Fan fiction is a fantastic thing to be doing. But I meet a lot of people who will write fan fiction and they will try to change the events. But before you do that, maybe consider, maybe what's more interesting than changing the event is to change the emotional reaction to the event. Are you going to have Tobey Maguire who turns around and after he learns his lesson becomes a hero immediately? Or are you going to have an Andrew Garfield who goes on a bit of a revenge spree for a few scenes before he turns around and becomes the hero we love? Like, these are really fascinating ways that you can change and look at your characters and change them in different ways. So I have some time here for some questions, and then we can move on to, I have a couple of final responses. Looks like we have a few more minutes, so that'll be good. If you'll go ahead and keep your questions or comments to about 2 sentences or so we can get through as many people as we can, that'd be great. Yeah, come up to the mic here, please.
Do you think there should be more characters like Deadpool who can break the fourth wall?
Ooh, that's a fascinating question. Okay, so let's a little bit of a thought on that. Both Deadpool and She-Hulk can break the fourth wall. And they're both famous for it. Have you seen the She-Hulk show?
No, I haven't.
All right. So a big part of what made the movie work or the show work, as far as like the narrative works, is that she is able to break the fourth wall. She solves the problem by jumping out of Disney Plus and like talking to the writers of the show. Now, that's fine, but that's also kind of cheating, isn't it? It's like, oh, we acknowledge that this is bad, so we're just going to go talk to the writers and fix it. That's a little too close to Deus Ex Machina for my taste. However, when Deadpool does it, he only ever breaks the fourth wall when it's not like an important plot point that's going to change everything. So, perfect example, have you seen Deadpool and Wolverine?
Not yet.
Not yet? It's fantastic, go watch it. This won't spoil anything, but there is a moment where he's kind of invited to join the MCU, and he runs over to the camera and he's like, "Suck it, Fox, take that, Fox!" And then he runs away. That doesn't change the movie. That doesn't change the story or the course of events. So there is a right way, I think, to break the fourth wall and to not break the fourth wall. Deadpool still had to go through the events that change him as a person. So should there be more characters that can break the fourth wall like that? Oh, absolutely. It's hilarious. It's great fun. And it's a great way to make a meta commentary about the world. Yeah, does that answer your question, Len?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Next question, please.
Have you decided on a favorite canon event?
A favorite canon event in terms of...
Do you have a favorite canon event that you think is the coolest or best implemented, the one that impacts a story the most? Do you have a...
Yeah, okay. So this is something that I think helps really define Spider-Man specifically, is for months and months and months, Aunt May is pestering Peter to come meet her best friend's niece and just won't let it drop. And she brings it up all the time, and Peter always seems to find a convenient way, Spider-Man or not, to get out of it. Until eventually he just can't do it anymore. And at the end of Amazing Spider-Man number 50, he opens up the door and Mary Jane Watson stands there and says, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." That is beautiful. And I think that really helps define the kind of surprise that Spider-Man has in that particular relationship and why people love it so much. Great question, thank you.
So my question was, you call back to some of the original ideas of like the emotional reaction to a canon event.
Yeah.
The idea of where justice ends and vengeance starts, and how a canon event can kind of play into that.
Okay. So the event needs to happen, is what I'm trying to get at. So vengeance and justice is really interesting because it is a very fine line that you can cross. I think going back to Batman v Superman, that's a great example of crossing that line between justice and vengeance. Or, better example, the Batman with Robert Pattinson. He calls himself vengeance. He's not out for justice. He's just out to scare the crap out of criminals so that they stop. That's not justice, that's vengeance. But, you know, at the end of that movie, he had to learn that vengeance wasn't the right way to go. He had to be more of a positive symbol, and then he becomes the symbol of justice that we expect. Did I get the gist of your question right today? Okay, fantastic. Great question, thank you.
Stop, Ray.
What?
I don't think that's on.
No, never mind. Sounds projected. So again, this coming to canon events, I was wondering that. Sorry about that. About seeing similar events through separate characters. Like we talked a little bit about Spider-Verse, and I feel like they have a great sort of example that if you're not Peter, even if you're not Peter Parker, you have a certain set of characters that are probably going to die every prominent male. A prominent male figure is going to die in your life. Like family member is probably going to be put in jeopardy. Like there's certain beats. I guess my question is how different do those beats need to be for it to resemble the same character? Say you're trying to do another riff on Spider-Man, while also keeping to the character, like while also keeping true to a character's like.
Good question. Good question. And I think we do have a really smart example of that. We brought up Tom Holland. If you were to ask me my opinion, I would say the Tom Holland movies are pretty good. But if you were to ask me on a much deeper level, I would say that the trilogy is really what makes up his full origin story. He doesn't truly become Spider-Man until the end of No Way Home.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because Spider-Man needs to learn that with great power there must come great responsibility. And while the other movies were, and every other Spider-Man story seems to teach him that within the span of like 20 minutes or so, the Tom Holland movies had to take a whole trilogy where he had to first learn to be himself, then to rely on himself, and then that he has this power and he must use it responsibly. So in regards to your question, I think what needs to happen is you need to be able to have the gravitas of the moment happen, but how does that happen matters a little bit less than that it does need to happen. Thank you. That was a very smart question. Go ahead.
My question was sort of along the lines of obviously with serialized comics, as you have sequels, that characters are developing traits that happen as the canon events that sort of like are their foundational backstory get further and further away. So how does like sort of passing of time, or the thing I was thinking about was Peter B. Parker in The Amazing Spider-Verse, where you see him again, he's a grown-up and he's washed up, he's in a divorce.
Yeah.
And how do you have all those traits and still have that character be legible as a Spider-Man? Sure.
That's great. In the first Spider-Verse movie, there's this beautiful moment that is kind of just, it's almost glossed over. You almost miss it if you aren't paying attention for it. Where Peter B. finds Miles and he takes the goober from Miles and he's trying to walk away and Miles says, "Come on, don't you remember? With great power there must come," and then Peter B. stops him and says, "Stop, I don't need to hear it from you." As characters and even as people, this is why I love characters so much, because characters, they mirror life so well. This is a washed up Peter who has had so many things happen to him that he's kind of forgotten his sense of responsibility. He might be going through the motions of being Spider-Man, but his heart's not really in it. He's not doing it because he needs to be responsible. He's doing it because he has to do it. It's become a new chore. But over the course of that Spider-Verse movie, he relearns his responsibility. He kind of gets his zest back. Now, I've seen this happen a lot with Marvel specifically, because Marvel doesn't reboot as often as DC, where they'll have a big character event happen and Peter will relearn what responsibility means. A fantastic example, or fantastic unexample, depending on how you want to look at it, is the Brand New Day storyline. Yeah. Where Peter makes the very responsible choice of selling his marriage off to the devil so that he can save his dying aunt. Yeah, so it's like, that's a little bit of a weird decision for Spider-Man to be making. But so that's an example of how not to do it. If you want to add more zest to that, add in some personal drama. Something's going on between Peter and MJ's marriage. How are they going to solve it? You know, make him face the consequences of his situation and own up to it. That's how you teach responsibility. Either that or have him make the wrong choice and then have him have to go back and fix it. Or, you know, you could do what Marvel did and spend 20 years not talking about it. All right, go ahead.
Alright, so in regards to canon events, in my opinion, there are two types in my head where there's a canon event where it defines a character and shapes them and changes them. There's multiple ways, like where it informs their decisions and the process moving forward. Then there's the second one where a canon event where it's not how you write it. Like a character can choose to respond and not allow that canon event to drive them, but instead engage to that event to where they have to go. Which one do you find that most audiences feel that they are more receptive to?
Okay, so just so I can, let me repeat it in a different way. So you're asking canon events where it pushes them as a character versus canon events where they have to do something about it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that goes into, I talked about this once in a video I did a couple years ago. There's something called the aspirational hero, the hero to reach towards and be like, and the dynamic hero, the hero that has to change. And at any given point, an individual is one of these two. You're either standing your ground and everything is trying to get you to move, or you're not in the place where you should be and you need to claw yourself out of the hole to get out and to live on a better plane of existence, so to speak.
Right.
So I think both of them have their place. And I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things in the third Spider-Verse about that very idea. Because I think what's happening is Miles' canon event is changing from having to watch his dad die to maybe having to go against what everyone is telling him and claw his way out of the hole. I think that might change depending on what the character knows. If the character knows that this is a thing that's going to happen, then that has to change the way that they interact with it. If Peter knows beforehand that Uncle Ben is going to die, does that change the power and responsibility lesson? Maybe not, because now he's learning he has this knowledge and he has the responsibility to go save it. You can reframe it that way. Great question, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So assuming that we are trying to create a character similar to another while maintaining the canon events, but not invoke these theses ship, how many canon events do we need in order to maintain integrity of the characters?
That, I think, depends based on what character you're doing and at what stage you want to have them in. Have you been reading the new Ultimate Spider-Man?
I know.
Okay. Super good book. Everyone go read that. Okay. So let's use a different example then. Okay. I think I have one. And there was a bit of a... Let's go with Christopher Reeve Superman and then Smallville. Christopher Reeve Superman, he has, as far as we can tell, only like 2 canon events that help define him, maybe 3. He came from the planet Krypton. He was raised by loving parents. And his dad died from a heart attack that he couldn't do anything about. And so he goes off to become a superhero. Now, take that and compare it against Smallville, where we have 8 seasons of Clark Kent doing everything except wear his stupid costume. It was fun. It was fun for like 5 seasons, but come on. 8 seasons, so 9, kind of, right? Was it 8 or 9? I don't remember. 10. Ooh, 10 seasons of not seeing Superman. That's rough. But what we get there is that by the time he becomes Superman, we have a lot more events that have happened to him. He's changed. And he's changed in a lot of the same ways, but it took longer to get there. and there were more things that had to happen. So I think you can take the big canon events and I think you can split them up into smaller ones if you wanted. Or maybe you can consolidate some of the smaller ones and make them bigger ones. I used Ultimate Spider-Man as an example, the new Ultimate Spider-Man, because the premise of that one is he doesn't get his powers until like way later in life. And he's already well established. He has a wife, he has kids, he's happy. Most of his canon events haven't happened, but they all happen in a split instant when he becomes Spider-Man. Thank you.
So you've talked a lot about the reason to adhere to canon events and include them. Do you think there's ever a time that it's appropriate to take an existing character's canon events and ignore them, or just basically ignore them?
I will always advocate for creative freedom. And if that's something that you feel like you need to do, I say go for it. But I also would recommend just going forward with it cautiously. Kind of like putting your hand in the tiger pen. You can go ahead and pet the tiger, but don't do too much. And the reason I say this is because of the Ultimate Ben Reilly example. Eventually, if you change too much, your character is not going to be recognizable, and no one's going to acknowledge it as that character. If you're making a Batman fan fiction, and you wanted to make a Batman whose parents are still alive, and he's happy, and he is well watched over and well cared for, and he's dating a nice girl and living life happily, it's going to be really hard to justify them becoming Batman. You know? And that's kind of what you have to think about is like, yeah, you can go ahead and change the canon events and definitely go forward with it. Have fun with it. But make sure you're not doing it to the point where we can't recognize your character or we have to start making ginormous leaps in logic to justify your character existing. Smart. All right, do we have any more questions? I think we have some time for a few more. All right, brilliant. And I have a couple of final remarks here because I want to point something out to all of us. When the movie came out and canon events kind of became a meme and we started seeing like photos and videos and GIFs of Miles Morales showing up at horrible historic events and stopping Spider-Man from stopping them from happening, you know, seeing all of those. They glossed over this, and I think it's because we were seeing the movie from Miles' perspective. Miles was being told about the canon events as being a bad thing. But there are so many good things that happen, not just in characters' lives, but in your lives too. You find people that you just fall in love with. You have people who look up to you. You have friends. You have triumphs. And those triumphs are just as important, if not more important, than the bad things that happen to you. So, at the end of the day, that's what I would like to leave you with, is that life is good. There are so many good things that happen to you, regardless of how dark it gets. Because that's the interesting thing, you know? Like, no matter how dark the night gets, the morning does come, and your day does arrive. So anyway, that's what I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you for helping me with this. Enjoy the rest of the convention. Buy something expensive. And always be your best self.